Hi, I'm Dr. Keith Volstad.
And I'm Laura McLeod Volstad of Volstad Chiropractic and Integrated Wellness. We are located at 275 Tony Penna Drive, Suite 12, right here in Jupiter. And our telephone number is 746-4242. We'd like to welcome you to this week's edition of the Chiropractic Corner, a weekly show spotlighting the chiropractic profession and what doctors of chiropractic do to improve their patients' health. In this program, Dr. Volstad and I plan to cover topics that pertain to your health from a complementary and alternative medicine point of view. These topics will include spinal injury issues like neck pain, low back pain, bulging discs, pinched nerves, and sports injuries, lifestyle medicine, dietary and nutritional advice, nutraceuticals, and supplementation, just to name a few. We'd like to encourage you to email us about topics that you'd like to hear discussed on this program. You can do that by emailing us at imchiro1, the number 1, at gmail.com. That's M as in Mary, CHIRO, the number 1, at gmail.com. Over the last several months, we've been talking about chiropractic and functional medicine, how the two disciplines interact and can provide patients with a complete primary care alternative medicine option. So remember, if you're looking for a primary care alternative option, chiropractic and functional medicine can offer you that. Today, we thought we'd switch gears a little bit and talk about how chiropractic came to be. You know, how was it discovered and how it has evolved over the years since that discovery. As many of you know, chiropractic has been the poor stepchild of healthcare. There are a couple of reasons for this, some of our own doing and other reasons not so much. In this edition of the Chiropractic Corner, Dr. Volstad and I are going to give you a history lesson about chiropractic. Woo-woo, it's exciting. Strap in. How it's grown from its humble beginnings to where today it's the largest alternative primary care option in healthcare. Long, hard fought. So, Doc, can you tell our listeners the story of the who and how chiropractic was discovered?
Absolutely. But first, I'd like to say a brief comment about why this history is so important. It's important because the story of chiropractic's history is what's given our profession its identity and has shaped who and what we are as that profession. Now, I do want to say there are some negative connotations and implications in this history. We're not attacking anybody. We're just telling the facts as they are. You know, as the old Dragnet show would say, nothing but the facts, ma'am. Now, having said that, chiropractic was discovered by a man named Daniel David Palmer, who was known then as D.D. Palmer, in late 1895 or maybe early 1896. He was what was called a magnetic healer, and after 9 years of that type of experience, he theorized that inflammation was the essential characteristic of all disease. Wow. Now, where have we heard that before?
I was just going to say that very thing.
Yep. Well, with his sensitive, quote-unquote, magnetic fingers, Palmer sought to locate this inflammation in his patients. And then his magnetic treatment involved pouring his personal, excessive, vital magnetic energy into the site of inflammation so as to cool it off. I guess he just thought he had that magnetic personality. But by no later than 1895, D.D. Palmer had decided that the cause of this inflammation, and hence of all or most disease, were displacements of anatomical structures like the spine.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yes, that's right. Now, as unsophisticated as that may sound by today's standards, you've got to remember the state of healthcare at that time. Healthcare in the 19th century was a smorgasbord of competing theories, practitioners, potions, and schemes. Except in urban centers or cities, doctors were pretty scarce, and most of the healthcare provided was done by family members in the home. Hospitals were even more rare than doctors, and they were seen only as places of doom where you'd go to die. In a nation then dominated by self-reliant farmers who had liberated themselves from the British, the popular sentiments ran strong, and physicians or doctors were seen as elitist pretenders of authority. By the mid-1800s, then, most of the early statutes regulating the practice of medicine in each state had been repealed at the insistence of the population of that state. So that's in this historical context, then, that the political medicine machine, alarmed at its loss of the monopoly on healthcare, organized what is today known as the American Medical Association. They did this in an effort to reestablish their authority. This is an important fact in the history of chiropractic, as we're going to see later in the broadcast.
Interesting.
Anyway, back to D.D. Palmer. He felt that these structural abnormalities were the problem, including structural problems with the spine. And here's how the story goes. He had a patient who was a janitor in the building he had his office located in, and this guy had been deaf for 17 years, apparently arising from an injury he had had in his back, or at least the two occurred at the same time.
Interesting.
Palmer noticed this injury in his upper back, and then he kind of pushed on it. That pushing caused a cracking sound. Well, he did it a second time, and the janitor then suddenly was able to hear. And here is the quote attributed to this man in January of 1896. He says, "I was deaf 17 years, and I expected to always remain so, for I had doctored a great deal without any benefit. I had long ago made up my mind to not take any more ear treatments, for it did me no good. Last January, Dr. Palmer told me that my deafness came from an injury in my spine. This was new to me, but it is a fact that my back was injured at the time I went deaf. Dr. Palmer treated me on the spine, and in 2 treatments I could hear quite well. That was 8 months ago, and my hearing remains good." And the man's name was Harvey Lillard, and he happened to be an African American. This was the first adjustment, and chiropractic was born.
Ta-da!
Ta-da!
A rather dramatic circumstance, I'd say. Wow. So the loss of hearing was the first condition treated by the first chiropractic adjustment.
That's it.
Wow. I'm sure D.D. Palmer was excited by that. Did he then look into this treatment? I mean, how much did he research and explore the new treatment to ensure that it wasn't just
yeah, I understand.
a freak?
He certainly was excited by that discovery, and he began to explore it rather extensively. He then changed his title from magnetic healer to a magnetic manipulator. He was so delighted with this success, and apparently had other successes as well, that he actually opened a school in the summer of 1896 called the Palmer School of Magnetic Cure. And it was later that year that he, along with his friend Reverend Samuel Weed, coined the term chiropractic from the Greek words that meant done by hand. Palmer's school then was informally known as Palmer's School of Chiropractic. Chiropractic education was born. So there we have the beginning of chiropractic, but let me tell you, the story had just begun.
I take it from that comment there's a lot more to the story. I'm sure our listeners are not familiar with how chiropractic matured after that, as I wasn't. Was it a difficult journey, or did chiropractic just blossom after that?
Yes and yes. The journey was difficult, and the profession exploded. People saw it as an alternative that actually worked. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The next chapter of this story is where the internal problems that have plagued chiropractic for over a century began. The mantle of chiropractic was passed from D.D. Palmer to his son Bartlett J. Palmer, or as he's known, B.J. Palmer. And the history goes something like this. In the spring of 1902, D.D. Palmer left Davenport and went out to Pasadena, California. Some people believe he did this because he was being threatened with prosecution for practicing medicine without a license. Well, when he left the Palmer School of Chiropractic in a pretty good, with a pretty good sizable debt. And it was his son, B.J., who had just recently graduated from the institution and was only 20 years old, was left to fend for the school. But he proved to be pretty remarkable. He secured financing from the local banks to bail out the school. He grew a beard to appear older, and then he also established his own following of patients and students. And while his father taught and practiced as a healer along the California coastline, B.J. restored the Palmer School of Chiropractic to financial health. Well, subsequently, in 1904, D.D. returned to Davenport, and the two of them operated the school together. However, they, like father and son, they'd had a stormy relationship, and circumstances would strain that relationship to its limits. And here are some of the challenges that they faced. A major one was competition from former graduates who started their own school and taught their own brand of chiropractic.
Interesting.
Most notable of this was the American School of Chiropractic and Natural Cure in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which was owned by a 1901 Palmer graduate by the name of Solon M. Langworth. In addition to competing for the students, the developer of chiropractic was incensed, or he was really, really angry, because Dr. Langworthy's introduced naturopathic remedies in the curriculum, things like stretching machines and nutrition and herbal remedies. And this was the beginning of the feud that exists in our profession even still today between the straights and the mixers.
You're going to have to explain that.
I'll get to that. This feud then was so bad that when Langworthy and his associates succeeded in having a chiropractic licensing bill passed by both houses of the Minnesota legislature in 1905, the Palmers, with a little bit of help from that political medical community that I talked about, persuaded the governor of Minnesota to veto the legislation. It was Palmer's faction that today is known as straights. And these guys believe chiropractors should only find and correct subluxation in the spine without diagnosis or medical examination of the patient. Strictly spinal manipulators and nothing else. They have an almost religious feeling about chiropractic and chiropractic philosophy. Now, Langworthy's faction is known today as mixers. Mixers believe that chiropractors should diagnose and medically examine a patient. Take blood pressure, order lab tests, prescribe nutritionals and herbs, and utilize physiotherapy. And just as a side note here, mixers make up the majority of our profession today, as well as most all of the chiropractic colleges are of the mixer bent as well. Unfortunately, this split or schism has been a major thorn in the side of our profession because the public, specifically the political public, don't know what to believe about chiropractic.
It could be confusing.
It can, and it is. Both sides claim to be the true champion of chiropractic. As recently as March of this year, that is the year 2015, this rift was very evident as the legislature in the state of New Mexico was prepared to pass legislation that would have expanded the scope of practice in chiropractic in that state. Now, a small vocal group from the straight side testified before the legislature and gave them a completely different version of what chiropractic is and should be. In other words, they didn't want the scope of practice expanded. Interestingly enough, most of this group was from outside the state of New Mexico.
Where were the mixers there?
Well, they were trying to get the law passed. They were there. Now, due to that experience, though, the legislature didn't know what to do. They didn't pass the bill, and they basically said something like, you guys need to figure out who you are and what you are, and then come back and talk to us. It's a sad state of affairs when it turns out that you are your own worst enemy. I think it's important to say at this juncture that as a chiropractor, I have as much medical education as a medical doctor does. And in a previous show, I think the first one we actually did, we talked about comparing chiropractic education to medical education. And I'm telling you that the number of hours required to receive a degree in chiropractic is actually a few more clinical hours than what's required for a medical doctor. So when I say I'm a mixer, which I am, it is important to note that I have been educated and trained to have an expanded scope of license to medically diagnose, to order the lab tests, etc.
And to read
so
them.
It's not like I'm trying to do these things or that our profession are trying to do these things without the appropriate training. We have the training. It's just that there are those within our profession who don't want us to exercise that training because in their mind it violates the philosophy of chiropractic, which I believe if you review the history of the discoverer and inventor of chiropractic, that is D.D. Palmer, you'll find that that really isn't true.
I'm sure most people have no clue about this rift with the profession. You can't unless you're right in the middle of it. And you're right, it sounds like you guys are, from a professional point of view, your own worst enemy. What about your relationship with the medical community? I'm sure most people have the feeling that chiropractors and medical doctors don't really get along professionally, or they're not collaborative. Is that true? When did that start, and is it getting any better?
Well, I think there is an improvement in that regard. But if you remember, earlier I mentioned that the American Medical Association was formed in the mid to late 19th century. And it was established because the political medical machine at that time felt that their authority was being eroded, and they wanted to monopolize their control over health care in this country. Well, when chiropractic came up on the scene, the medical community felt economically threatened and used their considerable power to block legislation, as well as to have chiropractors arrested for practicing medicine without a license.
Wow.
Now, this earliest known prosecution of a chiropractor for unlicensed to practice dates to 1905 in Wisconsin, although there may be earlier incidences that we just don't know. D.D. Palmer was tried and convicted of practicing medicine without a license in Davenport in 1906. He served 23 days in the Scott County Jail. Now, the legal basis for his conviction was an advertisement in his school magazine in which he claimed to cure various diseases. Now, this trickle of early cases, that is, cases of prosecution for practicing medicine without a license, would eventually become a torrent, and by 1931, it was estimated that chiropractors had collectively undergone 15,000 prosecutions, although there were only not even 12,000 chiropractors in practice at that time. So from the very beginning, the medical profession was trying to squash chiropractic using the legal/legislative system to do so.
Okay, so the medical profession didn't like chiropractic right out of the box for various reasons, but what's
Mostly economic, by the way.
Okay, yeah, cutting into their patient base.
Cutting into their patient base, exactly.
All right. So what's been done to correct the dilemma, or has it been?
Yes. And that's very true, and I must confess that the early chiropractic profession was partly at fault, as they really vocalized a disdain for the medical doctor and the allopathic professions. And in a lot of ways, this created the discord between the two professions. I mean, B.J. Palmer really didn't think highly of medical doctors and made no bones about it. So it was a mutual situation. But I think the AMA took it to an extreme, as demonstrated by the following. In November of 1963, the AMA established its Committee on Quackery, and the explicit purpose of this commission was, and this is their verbiage, first the containment of chiropractic and ultimately the elimination of chiropractic.
Wow.
Yeah, they were very explicit. To this end, the AMA's extensive resources were committed to an anti-chiropractic campaign, which they also enlisted state medical societies to help. Now, this included the following parameters, and again, this is their own words: suppressing research favorable to chiropractic, undermining chiropractic colleges and postgraduate educational programs, using new ethical rulings to prevent cooperation between MDs and chiropractors in education, research, and practice. They even subverted a 1967 United States government inquiry into the merits of chiropractic, and basing an extensive misinformation campaign against chiropractic on the calculating portrayal of chiropractors as unscientific, cultists, and having a philosophy incompatible with Western science medicine.
Boy, given all that, why would anybody wanted to go to chiropractic school to become a chiropractor? Wow.
The reason for that is because the population of the country, that is, the people, saw the benefit of chiropractic care in helping them with some of their health ailments. So, it was the population or the populace that supported chiropractic during this major attack by the political medicine machine. Now, there are other examples of the political medicine machine and trying to and often succeeding in denigrating chiropractic. For example, due to the political medicine machine, chiropractic was excluded from Medicare until 1973.
Oh my goodness!
And at that time, we were only allowed one service to be paid for by Medicare, and that's the adjustment. And that is still true today. But in 1973, when we were granted that inclusion, if that's what you'd like to call it, it was a requirement that our patient have an x-ray to demonstrate the need for the adjustment, but yet Medicare would not pay for the x-ray. So in essence, a lot of times people were excluded from Medicare because they couldn't afford the x-ray.
Oh, boy.
However, that AMA's Committee on Quackery is the biggest and probably the most famous. Eventually, chiropractors had had enough, though, and they actually fought back. A chiropractor by the name of Chester Wilk, along with 5 co-plaintiffs, brought suit against the AMA and several co-defendants. Representing the chiropractors' claim that the AMA had violated the Sherman antitrust laws was an attorney by the name of George McAndrews, who happened to have a brother, Jerry McAndrews, who was a chiropractor and the executive vice president of the International Chiropractic Association. George McAndrews then spent 14 years pursuing this case, and it involved 2 trials, 1 jury and 1 magistrate, and innumerable appeals you can only imagine. Meanwhile, as McAndrews pressed in federal court on behalf of the plaintiff chiropractors, the Attorney General of New York filed a similar suit in federal court against 13 medical organizations on behalf of the citizens of New York. Soon, additional cases were brought to the judicial attention by other states. Interestingly, Wilk versus AMA was not the first time that the AMA had been tried for federal antitrust violations. There was once in 1938 and once again in 1943. And they lost, but they didn't learn their lesson. So before this case ended, many of the co-defendants settled out of court, and the AMA rescinded its ethical ban on professional collaboration between the MDs and doctors of chiropractic. Eventually, this case was settled, and in August of 1987, the federal judge who oversaw the case, Judge Susan Gatzendoner, ruled in favor of chiropractic. And she noted, and I quote, "Although the conspiracy ended in 1980, there are lingering effects of the illegal boycott and conspiracy which require an injunction. Some medical physicians' individual decisions on whether or not to professionally associate with chiropractors are still affected by the boycott. The injury to chiropractors' reputations, which resulted from the boycott, have not been repaired. Chiropractors suffer current economic injury as a result of the boycott. The AMA has never affirmatively acknowledged that there are and should be no collective impediments to professional association and cooperation between chiropractors and medical physicians except as provided by law. Instead, the AMA has consistently argued that its conduct has not violated the antitrust laws. An injunction is necessary to ensure that the AMA does not interfere with the right of a physician, hospital, or other institution to make an individual decision on the question of professional association," unquote. Now, this finding was published in the pages of the AMA Journal, and the judge's findings and injunctions against the National Medical Trade Association were forcibly brought to the medical professionals' attention. Although various appeals were filed, Gatzendoner's findings still stand today.
Holy crow, what an ordeal.
It was a massive ordeal. And now you see why there's that negative connotation to chiropractic. It was brought on by the AMA and this Committee on Quackery back in, I think it was, what, 19...
Got to be early 19-something. Quackery is...
I just had it a second.
quite a word.
1963.
Oh, my. So does that mean that the medical community and the chiropractic community now have an easier collaboration? Or is there some professional interaction? Is it better than it used to be?
Yes, the answer is yes, definitely. Historically, though, the relationship between the doctors of chiropractic and doctor of medicine have been marked by this acrimony and competition, especially economic competition. But this has begun to diminish in more recent years.
Isn't it true, Doc, that only, 7 to 9%, or is it?
I think it's 9 to 12%.
Oh, it's a little bit higher. Well, that's good. Of the population even take advantage of chiropractic services or even know about chiropractic or go to a chiropractor because they're not being referred by and large by the medical community.
That's absolutely correct.
It's word of mouth. They've got to hear it from a friend who said you need to go try this first.
The aura or personality of chiropractic today is a direct result of what occurred in 1963 with this committee on quackery.
Well, let's hope for our patients' sake that the future is a little brighter for chiropractic. Thanks, Doc. And now we're really running out of time. Let's move on to the tip of the week. Here's a good one, you guys. Sit down and then stand up. Did you know that sitting for long periods of time can shorten your lifespan? Research has shown that sitting for extended periods of time causes several changes in our body's physiology that can be detrimental to our health. Probably no surprise there for many of you. For example, this is pretty shocking. Sitting for 2 hours results in a 20% drop in good cholesterol. We burn only 1 calorie per minute, and the enzymes that process fat cut back by 50%. That's not news any of us want to hear. Your risk of diabetes goes up, and all the activity of our leg muscles shut down. In fact, research by the American Cancer Society of over 2 decades and of 135,000 people showed that those who sat for 3 hours had a 20% higher death rate, and people who sat 6 hours a day or more had a 40% high death rate. So get up out of that chair. Your life may just depend on it. Set that timer on your phone, go off every 30 minutes, and get up and walk around the room. Well, that about wraps it up for another edition of the Chiropractic Corner. Again, thank you for joining us. Dr. Volstad and I would like to thank you for listening, and don't forget to let us know what questions you may have for Doc or topics you'd like to learn more about by emailing us at M as in Mary, CHIRO, the number 1, @gmail.com. We're located at 275 Tony Penna Drive, Suite 12, right here in Jupiter. And our telephone number is 746-4242. We'd love to hear from you. Google Volstad Chiropractic to find our website for more information about our office or to listen to archived programs from the Chiropractic Corner. For those on Facebook, please search and find our Facebook page and give us a like. We post a lot of information about health care and natural remedies that you can use at home. Join us next weekend for another edition of the Chiropractic Corner, right here on WJUP, The Jupe, 103.9 FM, Saturday and Sunday mornings right after the 10:30 a.m. news. Until then, be well, live well. We'll see you next week.